Alright, fellow Slayers, time for the final episode of Read the Day, which is Killed by Death. A flu-stricken Buffy patrols the cemetery. Xander, Will, and Cordelia surprise her as she nearly stakes Xander. They try to convince her to go home, but the damage that Angel has done so far continues to fuel her fire. Angel appears behind her and attacks Cordelia. Buffy and Angel fight until he pins her down. Will throws a coat over his head, and he's turned away by the three's crosses. Buffy faints and the gang rush her to the hospital. After being stabilized, she is admitted to the hospital for a few days against her will. Her mother reveals that Buffy has always hated hospitals, ever since her cousin Celia died in one while Buffy was in the room. Joyce brings her the topic of Miss Calendar's death at Giles, which she would much rather forget. Meanwhile, Xander, Willow, and Cordelia wait to protect a very sick Buffy from Angel. That night, as the clock changes to 2:27, Buffy sees a small boy standing in her doorway. He leaves, then a strange-looking man, not quite human, follows after him, glancing into Buffy's room as he goes. As she follows the man down the hall, she thinks back at her cousin and they playing when they were younger. She also remembers Celia's time spent in the hospital. Buffy awakes and the clock changes to 2:27. She takes a walk down the hall. Two men exit the children's ward with a child who had died that night. At the door, she overhears a conversation between Dr. Back and Dr. Wilkinson about the doctor's experimental treatments on the children that raise their temperature to dangerous levels. As she begins to leave, she encounters two children that tell her about death. He comes at night, and the grown-ups can't see him. That night, Angel comes to the hospital with flowers, but Xander stands guard. They stand face-to-face and exchange threats. Angel tells Xander about how he's still in love with Buffy and how jealous he must be that Angel got her first. Angel says that Xander standing in his way won't stop him from going into Buffy's room, and Xander points out the guards, policemen, doctors, and orderlies. Angel leaves. The next morning, Dr. Wilkinson comes to check on Buffy. She comments on the fact that Buffy's wrist is no longer swollen and how fast she seemed to heal. Buffy, still anxious about being in the hospital, says that's great and that she can leave. Dr. Wilkinson pushes her back into bed just as Buffy's friends visit and tells them to try to keep Buffy from bolting. They come bring gifts to cheer her up. Xander with balloons, Will with Buffy's finished homework, and grapes from Giles. Cordelia claims that she was out of the loop on gifts, and Giles points out that gifts for people in the hospital are common among humans. They all take a walk outside, and Buffy tells them about the conversation she overheard. Dr. Becker was trying experimental treatments on the kids, and Dr. Wilkinson doesn't agree with him. Buffy says she thought she saw something too. However, Cordelia asks if maybe Buffy's just creating a demon because she needs something to fight so she doesn't feel so powerless in the hospital. Buffy does say that she's not sure, but since she's forced to stay at the hospital, she plans to find out what the doctor's up to. Xander volunteers everyone's help. Cordelia and Xander sneak into the hospital's record room, search for records on the girl that died that night, Tina. Meanwhile, Giles and Willow search for information at the school library. Cordelia's covered with the security guard. She flirts him until Xander can escape with the records. When she leaves the guard, Xander expresses jealousy and Cordelia expresses her anger about Xander's behavior around Buffy. She leaves to take the records to Giles, and Xander watches her back as she goes. Buffy takes a walk to the hospital and finds the little boy, Ryan. He's drawing a picture of the man she saw in her dream. Willow digs up information on Dr. Becker at the library of Giles, and she finds that he has a large past of experimental treatments and investigations into his practices. Meanwhile, Dr. Becker's working on trying to cure the children's illnesses. After finding a solution that he thinks will work, he takes it to the children's ward and try it out. Before he can do anything, an invisible creature attacks him, slashing him up. Buffy tries to stop him, but is thrown aside. The next morning, Buffy informs everyone that Dr. Becker's not the suspect, but shows them the drawing that Ryan made of the creature. Joyce walks in with the good news that Buffy can't go home, but Buffy insists she should stay a little longer. Confused, her mother leaves to tell the doctor. Xander, Giles, and Cordelia leave her alone and come up with a plan. Giles and Cordelia head back to the library while Xander stands guard in case Angel shows up. At the library, after thoroughly annoying Giles, Cordelia closes the book she was looking through, only to find a picture of the monster on the cover. Later, Cordelia calls Buffy to tell her that the monster is called Der Kindestod, and the name means child death. When Giles comes in with a book on how he kills, Cordelia expresses disgust. Giles takes over and tells Buffy that he sits atop his prey, pinning the child down while he slowly sucks their life out. Buffy thinks back to her time at the hospital as a child again, seeing Chris and Celia screaming and fighting at something on top of her. Buffy goes silent on her phone, and after a few moments, Will takes it from her, thanks Giles, and hangs up. Buffy then realizes that Durkindestod was also the killer of her cousin. Ooh. Buffy questions how she's going to fight the monster when she can't see him. Will points out that she did see him once, and Buffy realizes that it was her high fever that gave her the ability. The two head to Dr. Becker's office in search of answers. They find out that Dr. Becker was giving the children injections of the disease they already have in order to inoculate them. Buffy says to inject herself with one of the vials the doctor was using on the children. Will stops her, warning that the liquid is 100% pure and will kill Buffy instantly if she drinks one. Will then dilutes 2 drops of the medicine in the water so Buffy can drink it safely. Buffy's fever rushes up to near 107 degrees and she stumbles to the children's ward. She finds all the children are gone. They have headed down to the basement in hopes of escaping from death. Buffy's fever kicks in and she sees Durkindestod in the children's room and watches as he heads down to the basement. The room's door is locked, so Buffy and Willow rush to find access to the basement. Dr. Wilkinson tries to stop them, but Buffy shoves her aside. When security guards stop the two, Willow starts screaming that frogs are all over her, so Buffy makes her escape. Dr. Wilkinson tells them they need to stop the other girl, not Willow. Buffy works her way to Xander and helps her down to the basement. The children wait quietly in hopes of not being found, but then Durkindestod picks up Ryan. He and all the other children scream, and Durkindestod tosses him to the floor. H climbs atop Ryan, two tubes coming out of his eyes to settle over Ryan. Buffy arrives just in time, smacking the demon over his head with a board, then fights him off. Just as his tubes come out of his eyes to cover hers, she kills Durkindestod, snapping his neck. Xander arrives and Buffy leaves leaning on him. Buffy finishes her rehabilitation at home, with Xander and Willow laying on her bed watching TV. Joyce waits on all their requests to bring more snacks to them. Joyce hands Buffy a letter from Ryan, a drawing of her hailing over Durkindestod, with copious amounts of blood coming from the demon's neck. Joyce says that the drawing is nice. Okay then. So anyway, let's take a look at some continuity surrounding this episode. Willow's fear of frogs, mentioned in What's Smiling Part 1, is spread up when she pretends to have frogs crawling over her. The book in which Cordelia finds information on Durkindestod also contains a passage on a demon belonging to the Brotherhood of Seven, defeated in the puppet show. This is the first of 3 times Buffy is hospitalized in Sunnydale, the others being in Graduation Day Part 2 and Villains. Ryan sends the first young boy to peer at Buffy in the shadows. In nightmares, Buffy sees Billy, a local boy in a coma, astral projecting around school. Interesting. So now let's take a look at some production notes about this episode. According to Joss Whedon, Durkindestod was based on the scene that creeped me out as a kid, as with many of the monsters on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In general, the monsters were suggested by the vague boogeymen figures that bedevil many children. And now let's take a look at some pop culture references. Xander tells Buffy that this is not the time to challenge Angel for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, referring to the sports organization that has been staging MMA fights since 1993. Cordelia comments on the noses of actress Gwyneth Paltrow and the toy Mr. Potato Head. Entering the hospital, Angel whistles part of Symphony No. 9, composed by Ludwig van Beethoven in 1824. Buffy pretends to be Power Girl as a child, a superhero who first appeared in comics in 1976. When Buffy says the kids called the monster that sought death, Xander warns her not to play chess with him. He asks her to, because he's a whiz at it. This is a reference to the movie The Seventh Seal, in which a Bedevil Knight plays chess with death for his life. And now let's take a look at a goof about this episode. The villain Giles takes Joyce to when Buffy falls asleep in the hospital is unplugged, with a visible empty jack on the lower left side of the phone. And now let's take a look at a final note about this episode. Samples of this episode's score are used as the background music in the Buffy Season 2 DVD collection. Senator Durkindestod gasping is even heard in the episode menus. I actually did not know that. Interesting. So overall, I think this episode is actually pretty darn scary, and yeah, that Draconis God creature, whew, yeah, he's one scary looking fella. So overall, I give the episode Killed by Death 4 vampire steaks out of 5. Well, anyway, tune in next time as we take a look at the next episode, I Only Have Eyes for You. So, until then, here endeth the lesson.